Well, hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Political State Podcast from the Oklahoman. I'm Ben Felder here in the Oklahoman's podcast studio in the downtown newsroom. This week, Governor Kevin Stitt reached his 100-day mark, which is traditionally a chance to assess the start of a new term in office. Carmen Forman, who covers Governor Stitt for the Oklahoman, is with us to talk about that. But first, the 2020 race for Oklahoma's 5th congressional district officially became a contested race as State Senator Stephanie Bice announced her candidacy as a Republican. And she'll no doubt face a contested primary, but she came out swinging against Representative Kendra Horn and showed she intends to paint Horn as a supporter of, quote, far-left socialist agendas. That's Bice's words, not mine. And joining us to discuss it is actually the person who broke this story yesterday for the Oklahoman, or today actually, is Chris Casteel. And so, Chris, first off, you broke the news about Bice running for Congress. Were you kind of surprised for messaging because she's really trying to paint Horn as that, Pelosi Democrat who's taking her district too far to the left?
No, actually, Ben, I think this is going to be the game plan nationwide in these districts that Democrats won in 2018 that were carried by Trump in 2016. The focus will be a lot of the focus for the Republican challengers trying to win these seats back will be some of these Democratic freshmen who are way far to the left, really, of the Democratic Party, but get a lot of attention. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is obviously the most prominent of these, but even some of the presidential candidates, run on Medicare for all, are promising. The Bernie Sanders types, who is, he says, a democratic socialist. So I think they're just going to pound that home. I did a bunch of town halls with congressmen a few weeks ago, and there were so many questions about socialism. It was, I think I led with it when I did a story on it. As a woman screaming about socialism, the spread of socialism in America. So this was always going to be, there was to portray them as on that extreme of their party. Pelosi's not even there.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask about Bice, but first, is that an accurate depiction of Horn? Because you talk about some of these freshman lawmakers that are getting a lot of attention for being, pretty far left, but that doesn't seem to be Horn's MO. I think some see her as a fairly, moderate congresswoman. How would you assess Horn on the political spectrum?
So it's so relative, isn't it? How I assess her, I'm not sure that I could, in her 4 months and less than 4 months in Congress, label her right now. There are plenty of people in Oklahoma who would label her as far left, because of the votes on, the guns, background checks, on the H.R. 1, which was this kind of sweeping campaign finance reform measure, and on other votes. But I did a story a few weeks ago about these votes that she's made with Republicans, mainly on procedural issues. And I think at least part of her rationale on those votes was to kind of distance herself from the party, but they were ones that would be hard to explain, really, if you had voted against the Republican procedural vote, given the reasoning behind some of them. It would have been hard for her to justify those votes. But like I said, moderate's kind of in the eye of the beholder. It's hard to put anybody on a spectrum these days.
Yeah. Well, and Bice is someone, it was interesting seeing some of the reaction from some people online. And, Chris, you and I were talking about our Twitter feeds, not by our own doing, but are maybe lean to the left, and that may just be the nature of Twitter, while Facebook may be a little different. So a lot of those who are Horn supporters, criticizing Bice for her criticism of Horn, that's to be expected. And some kind of throwing a jab at Senator Bice by saying, that they kind of saw her as a moderate. And now here she was coming off really right wing.
Do you remember this happened with Mick Cornett last year?
Exactly. Yeah. And so it's like you said, it's always in the eye of the beholder. And Carmen, I don't know if you've been here long enough to know what kind of, how Senator Bice is viewed in the Senate legislature. I don't know if you've got a take on that yet.
She worked with Senator Floyd on this rape kit, the expansion and centralization of rape kits in the state. It seems like she has worked with Democrats on a number of occasions, but she can't win in a primary if she's a moderate.
Yeah. Well, and she was instrumental in the liquor modernization, which for some people is a pretty kind of liberal thing to do. I mean, right? I mean, especially for some of those kind of maybe old traditional Baptist populations that you see in the state. And even some people were saying, hey, you did this on liquor modernization. Not to say that only Democrats drink. That's not the case. But once again, it kind of goes back to that kind of eye of the beholder, right? So we expect that Bice it's gonna be a contested primary for the Republicans. Right?
I think no doubt.
And so what do you think the game plan? I mean, you talk about her trying to paint Horn, as this Pelosi Democrat, and she did vote for Pelosi, and for many Republicans, that's enough to label her.
Those are very. They'll say that was her very first vote in the House,
even though the majority did. What is she going to try to offer, do you think? I mean, in terms of policy-wise, what is she going to try to run on? Or is it just going to be an opposition to the Democratic majority?
Senator Bice, what will she try to run on? I think that she will. I think that she'll say that they may have a better way on health care. That their priorities will be more tax reform, those kinds of things. Immigration, it's. That's obviously a huge issue with Republicans and nationwide, but in this state, you just hear it all the time, no matter where you go. That'll be interesting. She didn't, in her announcement, even address immigration that I could, in a clear way. So I think that's going to be an interesting issue for her because that really is one of the clearest kind of demarcation lines right now. And in a primary, I think they'll all be pretty conservative. They'll have to be pretty conservative on that. Even Mick Cornett last year in the runoff came out and said that he was with Trump on immigration. I don't think a Republican could say that he wasn't and win in a primary. So I think it on the positive side, it will be building a wall. That's what they talk about. It'll be maybe free trade. But I think a lot of it's going to be on the negative side.
Yeah, and this is still by vote count a Republican district.
It is by registration.
It's a blue district because of Horn holding the seat. Horn, as well as a lot of female candidates across the country, did very well in 2018. And part of Horn's success came in mobilizing female voters, especially kind of in the northwest part of the metro, which Bice represents. I mean, is there a thinking you feel like for Republicans that if we are going to have a good shot, we need kind of a strong female candidate?
I definitely think she was probably the right profile. And you raise a good point. In my mind, there's no way that Kendra Horn could have won the 5th District without Republican support. It's a majority Republican district. And, given the turnout, we knew it was a high turnout, but then, we see just, the incredible increase from the census figures that came out yesterday about it and the women participation. You have to think that of those Republicans who voted for Horn, most of them were probably women. I'd say, guessing by far, were women. And so next year, you have Trump on the ballot. Again, presumably, who's not real popular with women, and so how does that work out? I mean, so you have, let's say, a Stephanie Bice type opponent for Kendra Horn. Is that a tough decision for them? I don't know. It depends on how closely Bice has to align herself with Trump, and I would think that in the primary, every Republican candidate will have to align himself or herself with Donald Trump.
Yeah. Well, and so for some of those, female Republicans who decided not to support Trump or voted in 2018 kind of against Trump, there might have been a lot of reasons. But one is because of kind of his relationship, his demeanor towards women. I think it'll be interesting to see next year. Does that become a big storyline again? And how does Bice handle that?
That's
right?
exactly what I'm saying. I mean, what does she say? I mean, if she has to go through the primary supporting Trump and his policies, what does she say in the general?
Yeah. Carmen, what can we expect? What votes should we be watching for in the remainder of the legislative session that now will be interesting to judge Bice through the eyes of through the lens of being a congressional candidate? There's not going to be tax increases on the table like there were last year, but I'm just curious, is there anything that you see coming down the pike that you're like, all right, well, now we have to give this a little extra attention given the fact that Bice is running for Congress now?
Yeah, that's a good question. I can't remember which chamber it's in, but probably the pay raises for teachers could be a very decisive vote for her. I think a lot of Republicans are on board with that, but there's still some contingent of Republicans that say, oh, well, teachers got an average $6,000 pay increase last year. Why are we giving them more raises? That's the only one I can think of off the top of my head.
Yeah, there's not
constitutional carry she already voted for.
Yeah.
And isn't there an abortion bill that's still alive out there?
It went to the governor's desk already, so no more votes on that. But there might be.
Is that the ballot question one?
The one that the treat.
Yeah,
treat
the
bill
treat
to put
one.
on there. I believe
that's still out there. Yeah.
Okay.
Which and these aren't constitutional carry. These a pro-life bill. I mean, these aren't hard votes for her to take. I mean, this probably matches her the way that she's views the world, and also is good for her in running for office.
Well, and she said in her announcement that she was strong, very pro NRA or
93% rating from the NRA.
Yeah, exactly, and pro.
Which is that enough these days?
pro-life.
I mean, 93%. That's actually that seems kind of low sometimes. 7% against is sometimes something to you'll be targeted for that one.
Yeah.
But yeah, so maybe not a lot of big votes this year, and who knows what comes next year. But now she's a candidate for Congress, and so that's another thing that she'll have to kind of have to juggle. She's the first to officially announce, other than Horn.
Mm-hmm.
What are some other names that you're going to be watching?
The biggest one is Mick Cornett, and he can afford to hang. Just wait a little while. Everybody knows who he is, and he would be able to raise money probably pretty quickly. I don't know how long he can wait. I would think that he has to decide in the next few months if he's going to, because people are going to be choosing up sides, pretty quickly. So Treat said he's not doing it, right?
Correct.
I actually I didn't hear his name until he just said he's not doing it. But there are some others that I've heard that pop up every now and then. Longtime Republican personality here, Terry Neese. And
Cornett has run for this seat before.
He ran in 2006 and got beat by Mary Fallon in the runoff.
Yeah. So is this? Of course, I don't imagine that Cornett would have planned to run for the seat. He planned to be governor at this time last year. Is this just? Do you feel like he still just has the political bug, or it's just,
well, he hasn't responded to any inquiries about it, as far as I know, from the media. So I don't know if he's got the political bug or not. I think the last time we heard him speak about politics was at his watch party when he got beat by Kevin Stitt and said, "This is the last time you're going to see me on a ballot." So I doubt he's real enthusiastic about doing it. So we'll just see. I mean, it seems like he hasn't really landed anywhere since leaving the mayor's office. I mean, he had that campaign to run through the summer of 2018, but since then he's just been kind of on a book tour, and he made, there was some talk about him maybe becoming president of the University of Central Oklahoma. That didn't work out, so I don't know. And he announced this week that he's going to work for a PR firm here in Oklahoma City, but it was not real clear exactly what he's going to be doing there.
Yeah, and that very announcement, using some of the same language that he used in his own announcement that may not have been quite accurate with the 100,000 job creation kind of thing. Real quick, as we wrap up a conversation about the congressional race, going back to Horn for a moment, what's going to be the most challenging aspect for her? I mean, you could say on one hand she kind of rode, the anti-Trump vote into office in some ways. But at the same time, there's Trump supporters in the 5th District. I feel like the Mueller report and how it's landed has kind of landed in a decent way for her. The Democratic-controlled House doesn't seem to be barreling towards impeachment proceedings, and Pelosi says she doesn't think that's a great idea. I imagine that's going to be pretty similar to how Horn is going to tackle this issue.
I doubt Horn wants him to impeach.
Well, no, I know. So she's probably saying like, "Hey, this is not good. It's alarming, but hey, he's on the ballot in 2020. Let's just focus on that."
So I think going forward for Horn, one thing I should mention about her in her first few months in office is how much money she raised. And if you go through her report, donor by donor, it is overwhelmingly Oklahomans. Which is, and you would think, okay, so that's the way it should be, but it's not the way that it is. If you go through, say, one of the other delegation members' reports in the first quarter of a non-election year, it may be almost all political action. It may be all special interest money for the most part. But Horn collected more money, I think about $370,000 in the first quarter, more than any other member of the delegation, including Jim Inhofe, a senator, who's up for re-election, who's running again. So her support is there. It's deep. I mean, she would, and it's not going to be a money race anyway. I think both the national parties will get involved in this. There'll be plenty of money spent in this district on that race, but the money is a sign of support.
Oh yeah,
those people who gave to her, that this early, I think it's significant.
Yeah,
that she's raised that money. They know that they need to protect this seat.
Yeah, well, that's a great point. I mean, Republicans may feel like this is their seat to win back, but the reality is that Horn is now the incumbent, and there's some powers that come with that, a fundraising advantage, and just now she has the opportunity to run as the incumbent, and that puts her in a strong position.
And we don't know what Cornett's going to do, but I mean, Stephanie Bice starts from scratch. She has nothing. She can't. I think she has close to $100,000 in her state account, but she can't use a dime of it for a federal race.
Yeah. And if there's a Republican primary, they're going to use a lot of their money attacking each other first before they spend a dollar attacking Horn.
Yeah. And then the National Republicans come in after that. So again, I don't think it'll. But you're right.
Yeah, it may be something that Cornett is thinking about again. Do I want to go through another challenging
He probably
primary?
is, not real eager.
Again, with the opportunity, with the prospects of maybe not making it past. So, although I imagine that if he does enter the race, I mean, he would. I don't know who would be considered a front runner, but like you said, Cornett would have the money. He's got the name recognition. I mean, Bice is kind of a known, leader in the Senate, but I mean, he's the former mayor, longtime mayor,
and he
city,
won
so,
he won
county,
this area for. I mean, I think it's safe to say he won the 5th district against Stitt. Which, one last thing I want to say about this race before we move on to Stitt is that Bice hired her campaign consultant, who was not really known in Oklahoma before. By the time Stitt got in, I think a lot of the Oklahoma consultants that had experience in Oklahoma had already been taken by the Mick Cornetts, the Lambs, and so. I think the only reason that Bice even knew who Cam Savage of Indiana was because of Stitt's campaign. You had this guy, Kevin Stitt, who nobody knew at all, the political outsider, defeat all these well-known candidates on the way to becoming governor. So that's her.
Is that an indication that Stitt is going to be supportive of Bice, do you think?
I don't know. I doubt it. I doubt he'll get involved.
I don't think he's going to be supportive of Cornett.
Most Republican elected officials try to stay away from in-state primaries, of their party.
Yeah. Although I think it would be interesting to watch a Bice Cornett primary race, because I think even if Stitt's not publicly saying he endorses anybody, I mean, I imagine Bice will try to attach herself to a popular governor who knows what he'll look like a year from now, but a popular governor who's already had some Republican wins, and I don't know that Cornett will. I mean, spending almost a year attacking Stitt is kind of puts you in an interesting position where you're not necessarily
a couple months
trying to
spend attacking. Nobody really attacked him. Yeah, it was really just in the runoff with the Bull Stitt stuff. But they didn't really. They're not buddies now.
No. Yeah, I mean, Cornett didn't come right out and endorsed it after the runoff.
He didn't.
So yeah, it'll be interesting. For our sake, I hope Cornett runs. I think it'd just be an interesting story. But well, let's move on to Governor Stitt, who hit that 100-day mark. We've talked about what he's gotten done over the last few months already on this episode, agency reform, giving that power that he wanted. It seems like it's been a pretty. I mean, if you were on this, if your team Stitt, this has been a. I know you weren't here from the beginning of it, Carmen, but I mean, it's hard to really feel like he's had many political missteps, and he's achieved some of the big lifts that he's wanted to, especially some of those that you feel like he probably needed to get done in these first 100 days before too long. Yeah,
he's definitely made his mark, and we haven't seen him stumble at all, really.
Not majorly, I think
he was probably most heavily criticized for signing the constitutional carry bill, but before that, I think he did the agency reform. He signed into law the marijuana unity bill. I mean, there was a lot of bipartisanship on a couple other items. So I think he's made progress. And obviously the agency reform, bringing those major agencies under his control, that was a big part of his campaign. And to cross that promise right off the list, that I think that helped boost his profile.
Well, I thought was interesting is your story on Tuesday talking about his first 100 days. The quote from Representative Virgin, the minority leader in the House, she said that they were disappointed in him, but she just pointed to the fact that the education budget wasn't done, which is kind of in the hands of the legislature right now and is never done until the end of the session, and that they hadn't made any improvements in health care. There weren't a lot of direct targeted attacks. Maybe that's just a fault of hers, or maybe it's just that right now he's not giving the Democrats much to hang on, except for a few things. The constitutional carry Democrats were against, but many Republicans praised him for. I mean, Chris, you spent a lot of time covering the campaign and are still kind of following, I imagine, his time in office. I mean, kind of what's your assessment of his first few months?
I think that he's done a remarkable amount that he promised, actually. I mean, some of which was obviously had to be the work of the legislature. But, he going back to early in the campaign, I listened to him over and over talk about, agency reform, giving more executive power. This is a guy who came out of the private sector, a CEO, who is used to having control over, all functions of his business, and confused and just bewildered by the whole idea that you have all these agencies at the government. So the legislature was on board with that. They got that done quickly. Beyond that, I think that what Stitt has done out there really is kind of infused the building with some energy. I mean, it just, after the last few years, there was, how the mood was out there. I mean, people, just enthusiasm for anything was flagging, and a lot of that had to do with the budget rather than the chief executive. But he goes at things, I think, with, kind of openly and honestly, and I think it sometimes comes across that he is willing to listen. He has all these lawmakers over to the mansion, right, for lunches.
Yep, and breakfasts.
And breakfast, not to talk strategy, but just to talk, I think. So that's part of leadership. I mean, it's not just what legislation did you sign today. I mean, I think it's also showing, that you're willing to bring everybody else, listen to them, let them have input, and then let's move forward together, which I think is what he also talked about a lot. I mean, he would say, again, almost every campaign speech I heard, I've already been meeting with the legislature. I've called every single, remember that? He'd say, I called every single one of them.
Yeah.
And apparently he did. Apparently he's still doing it.
Yeah. Of course, he hasn't faced a teacher walkout or a budget shortfall or an election year. I mean, things that Fallon has had to go through. But he does seem a little bit more willing to get in the thick of it in a way that Fallon was kind of behind the scenes a lot during some of those most tumultuous times. I mean, he doesn't seem right now to shy away from saying, hey, if there's some turbulence, I want to get into the thick of it and try to see if I can solve this.
Yeah, I think one of the photographs that I'll remember most from this first 100 days is him shaking hands with the Muslim woman on the floor of the Senate.
Yeah, during the Muslim Day at the Capitol, something that Fallon had never done.
She had never met with them, and he went into the chamber knowing that he's probably going to get his picture taken doing that. And this is again at a time when, because of some freshman members of Congress, you have this kind of renewed distrust, I think, in some of the towns that I've been to, of Muslims.
Yeah, and he probably feels like he's got the momentum and the support that's not going to, if this was Drew Edmondson who had won and he had done that, there's probably a lot of some Republicans who had said, I told you, see, he's, but Stitt does it. He gets a pass for reasons that we know. But I think, one thing that's interesting, and I've said this before, I've even said this to them, I think he was on the podcast several weeks ago, he still kind of has this kind of like aw shucks mentality. Yeah. And I think it's real, but I think he's also learned that it's politically advantageous to where I remember when he had the press conference, I believe it was the press conference to announce that they had got a deal on the agency reform and how they're going to structure the boards and giving him the hire and fire power. And there had been some reports, we had reported that there had been some turmoil between the House and the Senate, and this was a chance to kind of show they were all on the same page. And somebody asked, like, well, where are the Democrats? And he's like, well, I don't even know what I don't know Democrats or Republicans. Now, first off, you need to know who Democrats and Republicans are to be successful in that office. I'm sure he knows who the Republicans and Democrats are. And some Democrats, some of his critics took that line as like, oh, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. I think it's endearing to a lot of people. I think it's one of the reasons why he got some of the support that he did, that he's saying, hey, I'm not here to play these partisan games, even though this was a very partisan moment. It was all the Republicans standing behind him. I mean, it doesn't get more partisan than that. But here he was saying, like, hey, I'm just trying to do good government. I mean, in just kind of this, like, basic sense. And I think he has seen success in that and is continuing to carry. It may be authentic, but I think it's also, politically advantageous for him and probably a smart strategy.
I didn't really experience, except for I think the first press conference he did after the negative ads started about his company, any much evidence of him being really thin-skinned at all. I mean, he seems to be able to kind of roll with stuff and move on. And I think one of the most remarkable stories I've ever heard on in any campaign was at a forum with him and Cornette and Edmondson, I think, and they got the cliche question, what's the biggest mistake you ever made? Mm-hmm. And rather than say something about policy or something that would actually wind up sounding like a good thing, he told this story about an employee at Gateway, his mortgage company in Tulsa, giving his notice that he was going to leave. And I guess Stitt was really upset about it, that this guy was leaving. Felt like, hey, he's moving to a different company in Florida, I guess. And Stitt took it bad at first. And they parted, the guy left, and they parted on pretty bad terms. And it gnawed at Stitt, that they had left on bad terms. And so he made himself call this guy in Florida and go, hey, I'm just really sorry about how everything ended, And it's hard to kind of bust through the cynicism of some people when it comes to politics. But that was like one of the most genuine stories, as I say, I've ever heard. And when I tell people that story and in their varying reactions to it, I go, well, just ask yourself how many times that you were in the position to do something like that and did it. Mm-hmm. Like where you did really feel bad about something, but how many times did you actually pick up the phone? And I think what it represents in him, and he told me later when I was asking him about this story that it's just something he got from his father. That's his father, the preacher. What it represents, I think, is he doesn't want to let like the things, kind of eat at him and like the past control him in any way. How he's always talking about moving forward, and I think that's that really is who he is. That he's not going to have these kind of let these resentments build up. To where he can't can't deal with some people, can't function with them.
Yeah, no, that's a great. Yeah, I remember you telling us that story, and that I think that's like you said, a lot of people are gonna be cynical, like, oh, that's just something you say on the campaign trail.
Yeah, but you don't.
No, you don't.
Hear stories like that on the campaign.
Well, and like I said, I think his kind of the thing that I was interested in these first 100 days was, of course, the question is, are you going to change the office? Is the office going to change you? He hasn't seemed to become hardened yet. Like I said, he hasn't gone through a lot of turmoil yet.
Right.
It's still early on, and he'll have plenty of crises that we'll be able to really judge him through. But he seems to be somewhat of that kind of, I'm trying to choose my words carefully here, but kind of, and I mean this not in a bad way, but kind of still kind of, goofy, down home, guy, as much as you can for someone of his means. But I mean, just kind of, down to earth guy that I think played well in the campaign, plays well in the building of the Capitol. And that's probably how he truly leads. He came in, Carmen, I don't know if you were around for this. I mean, you were in the video studio when he came in a couple days ago to talk with us. And, he's walking through the newsroom and just turned around and yelled out like, hey, newsroom, what's going on? I mean, just like that.
Because I've been doing this for 100 days.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is not, you're going to not necessarily get a positive response just yelling out in the newsroom. Yeah.
Most people didn't even look up.
But just kind of, I don't know. Just
didn't faze him. He was still smiling.
No, I know.
That's something you expect to see the day after an election win when you come into the newsroom. It's not something you necessarily see 100 days in or a year in. We'll see what happens a year in. But
I think he likes those sorts of things, the meeting and greeting of people, a lot more than maybe some of the actual tediousness of government. I think I could see some frustration on his part at how slow government actually moves. I mean, like, take, for example, some of these confirmations that the Senate is doing on his nominees for his cabinet or agency directors or whatever. In some cases, those people start working, even before they're confirmed, but it kind of holds up the process until they are confirmed. And I could totally see him being a little frustrated by just how that process takes a while. Whereas if you're a CEO and you say, all right, I want you to be my chief deputy CEO, you start Monday, then boom, very quick, very easy.
Yeah, well, that's a great point. I'm really curious to see when he runs into that wall with the legislature on issues, at what point does he actually kind of pull the trigger on flex his muscle as the governor? Because we haven't really seen that yet, right? I mean, we haven't seen him come out and say, I'm trying to get this done for you, Oklahoma, but the legislature, which is, his party is controlling it, the legislature is standing in the way. And, he's got a bully pulpit that he hasn't really used in that way yet. I'm sure he'll get the opportunity, though.
The other thing that I guess we need to hear from him is more of a plan, more of an agenda. I mean, if he's going to tick all these things off, what's next? Yeah,
and this hasn't been about creating policy. It's about the first 100 days, about putting himself in a position to create the policy. I mean, being able to control, the largest state agencies. Now it's on his shoulders to get it done.
Yeah, he's going to own it from now on.
And the teacher pay one, we've talked about this before. I mean, I think that was initially just a miscalculation of what the walkout was about, but he stuck with it. He owned it. He got the support for it. He's pushing that through. Not to say that that's ever easy, but when you've got some money to work with this year, it's a little bit easier to get done. What's he going to do with the education budget? What's he going to do with a legislature that doesn't necessarily want to put as much money away in savings as he does? So, maybe the budget that arrives at his desk will be his first chance to really, flex his muscle, but hasn't happened quite yet. So, well, that's going to do it for this week's episode of the Political State podcast. Lots of things to continue to follow, not just it, but this 5th congressional district race, which is just now starting to heat up. It seems like we're far away, but I guess just next year. You said next year, and I was like, no, it's not next year. Yeah, it is, 2020. It's next year.
I mean, you look at the Democratic presidential primary. I mean, they're in the heat of it.
Yeah.
Now. I mean.
Yeah, so it's this. We're in the thick of it. These are very relevant topics to be talking about for those who think it's too early. So, well, that's going to do it for this week's episode. You can find each and every episode of the Political State podcast on your favorite podcasting app. You can also find us on the Oklahoman's YouTube page. With Carmen and Chris, I'm Ben. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you again next week.